The flat overlooked the Radisson, like a watchtower that had been built too close to a fortress. From the very first night she moved in, she felt as though the building beside hers was not simply a hotel, but a mirror. It reflected her in strange ways, light against glass, sound bouncing down narrow courtyards, silhouettes sliding across the restaurant windows after midnight. It was supposed to be temporary housing while she studied. A lucky find through a fellow student who knew someone who knew the landlord. The price was right, the location good enough, and she told herself she wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghosts anyway. South Africa was new to her, university was new, and she didn't want to complicate her life with stories of things that went bump in the night. And yet, almost immediately, things began to bump. The light switch was the first sign. It clicked audibly sometimes when she was in bed, as though an unseen hand flicked it off, plunging the room into darkness, then back on again with a blinding wash of white that made her heart skip. She rationalized it away as electrical problems, old wiring, faulty circuits, whatever. She'd never lived in this kind of flat before, so who was she to say what was normal? But what gnawed at her wasn't just the light turning itself on and off. It was the switch itself, the little plastic lever that would be pushed down, firmly, in a way that electricity alone couldn't explain. Once, she left for a moment to grab her phone from the kitchen, and when she came back, the lamp was glowing. The switch jammed down into the on position. It felt deliberate, like someone had done it because they wanted her to notice. She ignored it. She had to. Classes were demanding, and she lived alone for the first time. She told herself she wouldn't let silly things unsettle her. The curtains in her bedroom she kept open at night. That was her habitat, let her see the sky, the city lights. She liked the sense of openness. Across the narrow divide of the street, her window faced directly into the Radisson's restaurant level, where sleek panes of glass reflected chandelier light and the faint movements of late night staff cleaning up after guests. It never bothered her, until one night. It was around 3 in the morning. She woke with that sudden, inexplicable alertness, the kind that sets the skin prickling before the mind knows why. The flat was silent, except for the hum of the fridge. She slid out of bed, still half asleep, and padded toward the bathroom. On the way back, she glanced across to the restaurant. A man was walking there, a solitary figure in a tuxedo. He moved with the quiet purpose of someone crossing a ballroom floor after a gala, as if he belonged there, though the hour was wrong. No diners, no waitstaff, no one else. Just him, crossing the brightly lit room while the rest of the hotel seemed dead. She frowned, thinking maybe it was a manager or security. Odd, but not impossible. She crawled back into bed, pulled the sheet up, and tried to ignore the gnawing unease. When she returned from the bathroom a second time, she saw him again. The same man, same tuxedo, same slow stride, head slightly bowed, the exact same path. Her stomach turned a little. It was uncanny, like watching a scene replay itself. He didn't loop back. He didn't reappear from the direction he should have gone. He just materialized again and again, each time taking the same walk across the restaurant windows, disappearing into nothing. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her face close to the glass, heart racing. She reminded herself that she was hidden, that with her room in darkness and the restaurant lit up, she could see out but no one could see in. The tuxedo man passed by again, his polished shoes gleaming faintly in the artificial light. This time, her breath caught. He stopped, mid-stride, as though something had jammed him in place. Slowly, stiffly, his head turned. She couldn't see his eyes at first, only the tilt of his chin, the strange sharpness of his profile. Then he lifted his hands, cupped them around his face against the restaurant glass, and pressed forward, peering into the night, directly at her. Her blood turned to ice. She dropped flat on the floor, heart pounding, pulse in her ears. She didn't look up again. She didn't breathe. Something inside her screamed that he'd seen her, that he'd broken the rule of glass and reflection. On shaking hands and knees, she crawled out of her bedroom and into the living room, where she curled up on the couch and forced herself to stay awake until dawn. The light switch clicked once in the hallway while she lay there, a mocking sound, like a finger snapping to remind her she wasn't alone. She told no one. To say it out loud would give it shape, make it real. She buried herself in assignments, in study groups, in the bustle of campus life. During the day, it was easy to pretend it hadn't happened, but the nights grew harder. The lights kept misbehaving, sometimes flicking on when she was out of the room, sometimes switching off when she tried to read in bed. The curtains she no longer dared to leave open, though closing them made her room feel suffocating, like she was cutting herself off from the outside world, while the thing in the hotel waited unseen. It escalated in subtle ways. She began to hear faint footsteps in the flat when she was alone. Always soft, always distant, but never in rhythm with her own movements. Once, coming home late, she found the living room light already burning. The switch had been pushed firmly down. She froze in the doorway for a long time, keys trembling in her hand, before stepping inside. No one was there. Nothing was missing. She wanted to scream, but didn't. Sleep became fractured. She jolted awake at odd hours, drenched in sweat, certain that someone was standing near her bed. Sometimes she smelled cologne sharp, old-fashioned, out of place. Once, in the bathroom mirror, she swore she saw the corner of a black tuxedo jacket pass behind her. But when she spun around, the room was empty, and the man returned. Not every night, but often enough that she dreaded 3 a.m. Sometimes she glimpsed him moving across the restaurant windows in that endless loop, as though replaying a memory. Other times, he wasn't there and suddenly he was, and her breath hitched in her throat as she felt his head turn, searching. She tried not to watch, but some sick magnetism drew her to the glass. She told herself not to look, but she always did, and when she did, he was closer. One night, she counted his passes. 1, 2, 3. Each time he disappeared at the far end, and never reappeared the way he should. Each time he emerged new, pristine, unbroken by the walk before. At 4, he stopped, turned, pressed his face against the window, his hands cupped like blinders. She ducked fast, pressing herself against the wall beneath her window, heart hammering. She stayed there for minutes that felt like hours, frozen. When she finally crawled to her bed, trembling, she realized the switch on her wall had been flicked on by itself, the lamp blazing, revealing her, as though offering her up to him. The sense of being watched grew unbearable. She left the flat some nights to crash with classmates, making excuses about studying late or oversleeping. No one asked questions, no one knew. She avoided the Radisson as much as possible, though its presence loomed like a second moon. Its bright glass walls glared across the street every night, and every time she saw her own reflection in them, she wondered whose eyes were looking back. One evening she returned home to find the curtains in her room pulled wide open. She hadn't left them that way. She stood in the doorway, dread rising like bile in her throat, staring at the wide, gaping window that faced the restaurant. The lights across the way were blazing. She felt certain if she looked now, she'd see him, waiting, smiling, but she didn't look. She couldn't. She slammed the door shut, curled up on the living room floor, and didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, the curtains were drawn again, neatly, tightly, as though by an unseen hand. She stopped keeping track of the nights. Days bled together in a haze of exhaustion and dread. Her studies, once the only thing grounding her, were slipping. Notes went unfinished, assignments forgotten. She was there in lecture halls, but her mind was trapped in the flat, on the other side of the curtain, staring back at the Radisson. Every time she glanced at the hotel's blank walls in daylight, it was like seeing a theater before the play began, its stage empty but waiting. That night, the man appeared again. She watched despite herself, heart battering her ribs as he strode across the restaurant's windows. 1, 2, 3, the same loop, the same slow, deliberate walk. On the 4th pass he stopped again, head jerking toward her window as though snapped by some invisible thread. This time though, he didn't press his face to the glass. He lifted one hand and raised it in a slow wave. Her scream caught in her throat. She dove backward from the window and clawed her way into the hallway. The switch on the wall clicked audibly. The bedroom lamp blazed, bathing the room in sterile light, her bed spread open as though waiting. She refused to sleep there, she couldn't. Instead, she wrapped herself in a blanket on the living room floor, heart thrumming like a cornered animal's. Sleep was broken, restless. When she stirred, it wasn't dreams that woke her, but sound. The soft drag of footsteps moving from the kitchen to the bathroom. The faint squeak of her bedroom door hinges shifting. Her eyes stayed clamped shut, body rigid. If she didn't open them, if she didn't look, maybe it wouldn't see her. She lay frozen until the gray light of dawn filtered in, then finally opened her eyes. Alone. Always alone. The days were beginning to betray her. Mirrors became traps. When she brushed her teeth in the morning, she sometimes caught glimpses of him in the reflection standing still behind her shoulder. His tuxedo blacker than shadow, face indistinct but fixed on her. She'd whip around and find nothing, but when she turned back, the mirror would seem somehow wrong, as though it had remembered more than it should. One evening, on impulse, she locked the bedroom door before bed. It gave her a fragile illusion of control. That night, though, she was jolted awake by a sound so precise it shattered that illusion forever. The metallic slide of her doorknob twisting, her eyes snapped open in the dark. The lock rattled once, twice, then stopped. She couldn't breathe. Minutes passed, heavy and endless. Then came a sharp click. The lock had turned. The door swung inward with a slow groan. She bolted upright, fumbling for the lamp switch. Nothing happened. The bulb remained dead. A figure stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the faint light spilling from the hall. Tall, broad-shouldered, the outline of a jacket. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. She couldn't see his face, but she felt his stare. It burned, icy and precise. Every nerve screamed for her to run, but her body was lit. Finally, with a strangled sob, she hurled herself from the bed and dashed past him. The hallway was empty. No footsteps followed. She slammed herself into the living room, flipped on every light, and sat there shaking until the sky bled pink with dawn. That morning, she packed a bag. She couldn't stay. She didn't know where she'd go, maybe a classmate's couch, maybe a hostel bed. Anywhere was safer than here. As she zipped her bag shut, the light in the bedroom flicked on. She froze. The switch had been pushed down again, firm and deliberate. The bulb burned steadily now, no longer dead. On the bed lay her phone, though she swore she'd packed it already. Its screen lit up, one notification. No name, just a message that read, "Don't leave." Her stomach dropped to ice. She grabbed her bag and bolted out the door, down the stairwell, onto the street. The morning sun felt unreal, too bright, too safe. She didn't care. She walked for hours, circling the city aimlessly, until the weight of exhaustion forced her back. She told herself she'd grab the essentials, find somewhere else for good. When she opened the door that evening, the flat was waiting. Curtains wide open, lights blazing, and on the wall above her desk, in the faint condensation of the humid summer air, words traced in finger-thin lines. "I see you." Her scream cracked her throat raw. She fled again, but this time when she reached the street, she turned her gaze instinctively toward the Radisson. The restaurant level was lit up as always, chandeliers gleaming, and there he was, the man in the tuxedo, standing perfectly still behind the glass, hands at his sides, watching her leave. That night, she begged a classmate to let her stay. She didn't explain why, just said she couldn't go home. But she knew she'd have to return eventually. Her books, her documents, her passport. Everything important was still inside the flat. She delayed 2 days. On the third, she forced herself back. The air inside was different, stifling. Still, the curtains in the bedroom were shut tight now, as though mocking her attempts to close them herself. The bed was neatly made. Her belongings sat in order. For a moment, she thought maybe it was over. Maybe she'd imagined too much. Maybe leaving had broken the spell. That night, though, as she lay on the couch wrapped in a blanket, she heard the faint hum of music. A low, scratchy tune, like something from an old gramophone. It drifted through the flat, filling the air with melancholy violins. Her skin prickled. Slowly she rose, padding toward the sound. It was coming from her bedroom. She pushed the door open. The room glowed faintly, though no lamp was on. On the bed sat a small box she had never seen before, black and polished. The music played from within it, soft and haunting. And beside the box, neatly folded, was a black tuxedo jacket. Her knees buckled. She stumbled back, slamming the door shut, heart crashing in her chest. The music kept playing, muffled now by the wood, but growing louder, insistent. She couldn't stay another second. She grabbed her bag, sprinted out, and this time, she didn't look back. She didn't care about her things. She didn't care about explanations. She left the flat for good that night and never returned. Years later, retelling the story over drinks or in late-night whispers, she would laugh nervously, calling herself an ignorer. She would insist she hadn't believed in hauntings before, that maybe she still didn't. But every time when she reached the part about the man in the tuxedo, her voice would falter, and she would admit, quietly, that the worst moment wasn't when he waved, or when he unlocked her door, or even when the jacket appeared. It was the last time she saw him. Leaving that night, running down the street, she'd glanced once more toward the Radisson. And in the bright glare of the restaurant lights, he hadn't been alone anymore. There were dozens of them, all in tuxedos, all walking the same endless path across the restaurant floor. And every single one had stopped, every single one had turned, and every single one had raised their hands, cupping them to the glass, staring across the street straight into her window.